I simply wasn't ready. Day one of the Inca Trail absolved me of any belief that I was actually going to finish this trek. It was one step and then another, and then keep repeating until there was simply no going back. In 2012, I went to Peru. I spent a blistering week down in an eco lodge on the Tambopata River where the heat and humidity were unbelievable. I hiked over a 14,000-foot pass called, well, Dead Woman's Pass on my way to Machu Picchu as I hiked the Inca Trail. I ate guinea pig. I ate alpaca. I somehow endured less than half of the oxygen that's available at sea level as the trail took its toll on my health. And you know what? I loved every freaking minute of it. But before we hit the trail, let's start with bullet ants, tarantulas, and this cute little raccoon thing called a coati. Now this part of the adventure started with a trip into the Tambopata National Reserve, as in a long rattling drive to the Tambopata River in a rickety van, and then a 2-hour boat ride in one of those narrow giant canoe-like things with a motor. On a river filled with caimans, which is their version of an alligator, and they also had these giant rat-like things that are actually pretty damn adorable. Now our eco lodge was well off the beaten path, as in no utilities, as in they had generators to kind of power the kitchen, but those got turned off in the early evening. Your toilets that you went to, well, they were basically powered by river water, and well, you kind of get the idea. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this part of the adventure because honestly, it wasn't all that, but I mentioned bullet ants and hairy tarantula spiders, didn't I? Bullet ants are these nasty things that you do not want to get attacked by. Apparently, the feeling is like being shot, and the pain doesn't fade quickly. We avoided them, even when our helpful little jungle guide took us directly to them for a little show and tell. Now it's funny, our guide actually did grow up in the jungle, and apparently they don't have pets in the jungle, but what they do have are tarantulas. Now he took a little stick like this with a little leaf on it, and he found a hole and he just started playing with it and playing with it. And this big old nasty spider came out and started playing back. And I swear to God, I think the two of them are having the time of their life, but this is what you do for pet entertainment when you grow up down there. Now, honestly, I really did like the week that I spent in the jungle. It was unlike anything I had ever done before. And we even went and fed piranha off the side of a canoe, of all things. But the reason we were in Peru, the real reason, the crux of the entire trip, was to go hike the Inca Trail at a slightly different altitude from where we were standing. Did you happen to catch the title in that transition, the fact that I hated Machu Picchu? Well, guess what? I really hated Machu Picchu, but before I tell you why, I kind of got to give you the story that led up to it, because otherwise it's not going to make any sense. But once you hear it, it's going to make complete sense. The trek is 4 days of hiking, sleeping in tents along the way, and it is not a groomed trail. It is not level, and it's at an altitude that carries no oxygen in the air, which is a really grand place to begin our tale. Now, I trained for months for this hike, but apparently I didn't know what I was supposed to be training for. I technically probably should have put a sock in my mouth as I walked on the treadmill at the gym, because at the altitude we were, at 14,000 feet at the highest peak, there's only 43% of the oxygen that you have at ground level. So it was a struggle. It was a struggle unlike anything I'd ever done, and something I just simply could not have trained for. The first day, they called it Inca Flat, meaning it undulates. And undulate meaning you're going up and down thousands of feet over and over and over again. They called that day acclimation. The second day, they just simply called pure hell. Now, I got to spend a little extra time on day 2. And by the way, day 2 is in capitals and in quotes because it deserves it. It's challenging is what they call it. It is a 14,000 foot peak called in English Dead Woman's Pass. For the life of me, I can't remember what it is in not English. But it is not a casual incline. It's straight up. Now, this is the part of the hike where you have to make a decision right before you start it, because once you get up and over that peak, there's no going back. You are not reversing because you got injured or you're tired. The only option left for you is to continue forward until you get to the outlet, until you finish the hike. There is no other way. You start day 2 in the wee hours of the morning, and there is one stop for lunch, and basically you spend all day moving forward, up and over. I have never in my life done anything so difficult. I was dead last in the group, shuffling as in slide 1 foot forward, rest, slide, repeat. And it's not just the going up the steep slope. Oh, no, 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 because once you're on top, you got to go down the same steep incline, just killing different parts of your legs, all the while wondering why you can't breathe. Oh, and on top of Dead Woman's Pass, it started to sleet. So we had that going for us too. When I finally got to the tent site, when I got in view of where the camp was, I fell to the ground and I laid there for a solid 30 minutes. There was no way I was going to be able to get up and move forward. I just did not have the energy in me. I mean, this sounds like a real crap trip, doesn't it? Like, why in the hell would anybody do it? And honestly, day one and day two were pretty much a blur for me, but then everything changed. Now, day three also has a fairly steep peak, at 12,000 feet to be specific, but whereas on the first 2 days I was kind of miserable, and even though it was raining, and raining rather coldly on day three, I was happy. I was giddy. Now, I don't know if it was because of hypoxia and the lack of oxygen, or maybe I just lost my mind, but day three was really damn good. Now, when we came down the backside of that peak, there was a lot of stone steps, and by that I mean stone steps where you got to jump down 2 or 3 feet from one step to the next. Water was pouring down those steps. It was slippery as hell. People were falling left and right, but not me. I actually ran. I ran as fast as I could down 14,000 foot cliff, laughing the whole way. Now here's where it's fun. We're on day two, I was dead last. On day three, I beat everyone. So I went off and I explored some ruins all by myself while I was waiting for them at the campsite, and it was glorious. And it continued that way through the next day, right up until we got to the Sun Gate and peered down at Machu Picchu. And that's where all of the hate begins. Now, there were 12 of us in our group, and we stank. Our personal hygiene had been lacking on the trail a little bit, but as we got to the Sun Gate and looked down into the city and started together into Machu Picchu, well, as we rounded the corner, that's when we smelled them. You see, Machu Picchu is actually a fairly large city, and it's abandoned on top of this mountain, but there is a road that leads up to it, and there's a lot of tour buses there. These hikers are everywhere, and by that I mean they do have hiking poles and they have hiking garb on, and they're posing for pictures like they just finished some kind of expedition, but they also smelled washed and they smelled perfumed. They were 1,000% complete posers. We had earned this. They did not. Sadly, that was all I could think about. There were 12 of us, and we had just spent 4 days alone on the trail, just us and our porters, and maybe we passed 1 or 2 other people as we were ascending and descending, but all we wanted to do was kind of go back onto the trail. It was such a shock to be immersed back in society, and also back into a society which, well, hadn't done what we had just done. Now, I was happy about the flush toilets, I will give you that. We had just spent 4 days squatting over holes, so the fact that there was real working plumbing was kind of a wonderful idea. But other than that, Machu Picchu, meh, didn't really like it that much. The hike on the Inca Trail, despite the fact that it almost killed me, it was one of the greatest things I've ever done. So with that, we'll see you next time.